So what we are looking at in this video, in this lesson, or in my exhortation or explanation is a better word for it, is looking at whether or not the eyewitnesses are credible or the writings are credible. I've said, and I'll look at one of the slides later on, that the reliability of the New Testament is dependent upon the credibility of the eyewitnesses. We can say that we have more documents. That doesn't prove that they're reliable. We could even say that the variants are really meaningless in all of the documents, or the majority of the documents. That doesn't make anything more credible. What makes it credible is whether or not we can ascertain that the eyewitnesses were there. I mean, obviously, what we call the writers of the New Testament, that the source of their writings was from eyewitness accounts, and that we have early accounts of that, which I believe I handled in another video blog, or vlog, as you may like to call them, whichever it is. So what we're looking at is whether we want to erase or embrace the credibility. That's basically what we're going to do today. We're going to look at whether we can embrace the credibility of the eyewitnesses, or whether we have to erase them and say that there is no credibility, therefore it doesn't matter how many documents you have, how many variants you have. If the eyewitnesses are not credible, then we're in the soup. We've lost this out. So the reliability of the New Testament, it has to be dependent on the credibility of the eyewitnesses. And that's what we're looking at today. And what I want to do first is look at the assertion, because if you remember when I started this series of this really is kind of a big deal, which will show up in all the other blogs I do, because I think anytime I blog on something, it should be a big deal. Should be a big deal for our Christianity. And, if we can, or if someone can destroy the credibility of the eyewitnesses, and that we don't have anything from the first century that tells us Jesus was a real person. He lived, breathed, and lived a sinless life, was crucified, died, and rose again on the third day, left the tomb empty, then Christianity is destroyed. It falls apart. There is nothing to rest your faith on. And so what the attacks come against is the credibility of the eyewitnesses. It might be disguised as the reliability of the New Testament, but I think, as we'll see, it really depends on the credibility of the eyewitnesses. And that's something I definitely want to hammer. So our assertion was this: it contains oral traditions that evolved and grew for centuries before being written down, accounts and letters that went through multiple editors and revisions before coming to us in the form we have today, and in all likelihood some straight-up plagiarized content in the name of the apostles like Paul and Peter. So this is a really, and I've said this before, that the person who wrote these assertions against the Bible in general, and specifically against the New Testament, basically says that there are oral traditions, which is, it's a good admission. I believe there are oral traditions, and I think it is also important to recognize there's what we call historical traditions, or oral history rather, as well as oral traditions. And so that's a good thing. But he says that they went through a multiple revision. Sorry, I'm stumbling here. It went through these multiple editors and revisions, and do those who copied the New Testament, did they make editing mistakes or editing insertions in places? Because if you ever look at the actual manuscripts, you'll notice that in the margins many times there are comments that are made that we have to recognize, that there were some editors to this. But we always have to go back to, do we have an accurate representation by eyewitnesses in the first century Jerusalem or Judea, in Palestine, if you include Galilee, and even if you look at the epistles throughout the Roman Empire. So when we look at the first century Palestinian accounts, first century Judean accounts, there are some things that we would expect. We would expect that the eyewitnesses would know certain facts about the geography of the land, specific people, interaction between Romans and Jews, at least those things. So we would expect that they would understand or know the geography, because let's remember that Palestine was basically relatively unknown in the Roman Empire. It wasn't considered a great place if you were going to be sent there by the Roman government, by Caesar, that kind of deployment would not be one that you would be excited about. It would be something that you would think, oh my gosh, they're sending me to the backside of the world. And so the names of things are very important to us. So we would expect that if we hear of things, what are they telling us? Anything that you wouldn't know unless you were there. Let me say it that way. So there are over 100 mentions of towns. Most of them are obscure. They would be unknown to other people who weren't there in the first century. And remember, in 70 A.D., during the height of the Roman war with the Jewish people, many towns were destroyed. Obviously, Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. But the names of towns like Bethlehem, that would be an unknown name outside of Jewish or New Testament history, certainly. People wouldn't know that. Bethany, Cana, Capernaum, those names would not be well known or known for someone to make up, certainly not centuries or even decades after the accounts actually happened. So we have to look at, there's 100 mention of towns. They mention 26 towns, and over 100 mentions of them as Jesus went in and out of different places preaching the gospel. Most of what Jesus did was up in Galilee, and so you have names like Cana and Capernaum, two of which are there and mentioned in the Gospels. And they're important ones. Nazareth, of course, being another one where Jesus was raised. And these are important to know, that these 26 towns and cities are mentioned. There's 100 mentions of them. So, and they're mentioned across all four of the Gospels. Some of them have the names of towns, like Cana, I believe, is only mentioned in the Gospel of John. But there are other names as well, Chorazin and so on. You can go through your Bible and look them up. I'll mention some books that are, I would say, would be really good to read to get a good gist of all of this. So how about the topography of and geography? So the gospel writers know that a person goes down from Cana and Nazareth to Capernaum. And Capernaum is one of the lowest cities there. Jericho is actually the lowest city. But you would know these things if you were an eyewitness. If you were traveling with Jesus or lived in that area, you would know that you go down from Cana and Nazareth to Capernaum, which is by the sea. And so those are only things you know, and you can go through the Gospels and you could see that when they mention these places, they're always going down from there, as well as going up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not north of everything, but it's higher in elevation. So the way people would address this was that they would go up to Jerusalem and down from Jerusalem to, say, places like Jericho. So those are pretty good, significant details that tell us that the writers of the Gospels, at least the source of the Gospels, would be credible, that they know the geography. Now, another one of the most, and I think this is one of the most important ones for us to understand, is the names that are given to us in the New Testament. And we asked this question: do the gospel authors know the names of Jews in Judea and understand these things? So we'll look at that, and I have to just give you a couple of books, as I mentioned, and here's my source for these things. One of the perhaps most approachable or accessible books that you could read is by Peter Williams, called Can We Trust the Gospels? It's relatively new, but he's done, I think, an excellent job of bringing up a lot of information that is not so easy to access. And when I say that, I'm thinking of this book by Richard Bauckham, which I think is one of the most excellent books written on eyewitness accounts, and it's called The Gospels as Eyewitness Testimony, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, the proper name. Subtitle is The Gospels as Eyewitness Testimony, and that's by Richard Bauckham. It's in its second edition, which included more than 40,000 words in some of the last two chapters. And so that is really an outstanding work. It's over 700 pages. So where the other book that I mentioned here, Can We Trust the Gospels, is rather short, if I could say that. But it's chock full of information. Peter Williams does an excellent job of sharing these things. So these two books, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses and Can We Trust the Gospels? Okay, so how do we look at these names? Now, I have to admit that when I first read Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, I was very tempted to skip over this chapter concerning names, because I thought, how important can these names be? Well, there's been some extensive studies, and Richard Bauckham has done an excellent job of compiling these studies and giving us, I would say, a bird's eye view, or a comprehensive view might be a better way to say that. And so he gives us a list of all the occurrences from all sources from first century Palestine, or Second Temple Jerusalem, as they might call it, found from ossuaries, which are bone boxes that Jews who had any kind of stature would bury their dead, and then after a year, when all the flesh was decayed, they would gather the bones and put them in a soapstone or sandstone box. If I got it right, I always get those two things mixed up. But they would inscribe on them the names of whoever's bones was being put in that box. And all occurrences, written occurrences, say Josephus and any other first century Jewish writers, they come up with that Simon is the number one mention of names in all occurrences, 243, and that includes the New Testament occurrences. Joseph is the second most, and there's 218. Eleazar or Lazarus, there is 166. Judah is the fourth, 164. Yohanan or John, 122, and Joshua 99. And then how they're mentioned, or number of individuals mentioned in the New Testament, there's 8 Simons, 6 Josephs, 1 Eleazar, 5 Judahs, 5 Johns or Johannans, and 2 Joshuas. So these are important names for us to remember. And you could see that they match the occurrences in the New Testament. At least there's 5 of them that are the top 5 names that are mentioned. Now, you might ask, well, maybe those Jewish names are common all over. Well, there were a lot of Jews in Egypt. And in Egypt, Eleazar is ranked as number 1 and number 3 in Palestine. But so there's some similarity there. But look at this other name, Sabbatius, or Sabbateus might be a better way to say it. He is ranked in Palestine as equal to another name. That's what that equal sign means. So he's there's one that has as many mentions. He's ranked number 2 in Egypt, but number 68 in Palestine. Joseph is 3 in Egypt, but 2 in Palestine. Dositheus is tied at 4 with Pappus, which is the next one, but he's 16 and 39 in Palestine. And Ptolemaeus is 6, tied for 6 with Samuel. So you can see there are different names in Egypt than there are in Judea or Jerusalem or Palestine. It might be the best way to say that. That they are tied in there, but they are definitely different names that are there, not tied. Fumbling here with my statistics, not my strong suit, but that's okay. So you could see that there are distinct names of people who are there. Now, Bauckham goes a step further, and he uses this word disambiguity. I think I got that right. So what does disambiguity mean? Well, it means the most common name for a Palestinian Jew, Jewish males, was Simon. So the Simons we have in the Gospels are often introduced with a disambiguator. Yeah, I'll say it 3 times. Such as Simon Peter, Mark 3:16, Simon the Zealot, Mark 3:18, Simon the Leper, Mark 14:3, and Simon the Cyrenian. So you see the disambiguator either quotes something about where they're from, their father, or a second name, or like Simon the Zealot, which would be like Simon the Rebel, or Simon. That's actually a nice name for a zealot. Sometimes they were called robbers or thieves because of the way that they gathered money. So what are some examples of disambiguation? This comes from, let me give you first that Mary is also the most common female name. And so the Marys are disambiguated as Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and of course Mary the mother of Jesus. And so when we look at these names, we realize that they are definitely disambiguated. So there are, let me give you this example of a very simple way to do it. This is from Matthew chapter 10, verses 2 through 4, when Jesus chooses his 12. And I'll give you an example of this, how this disambiguation works. The names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, he's number 1, who is called Peter, and Andrew, 99. So there's no disambiguator other than his brother to that. James, number 11, the son of Zebedee and John, number 5, his brother. So those are both disambiguated. Now watch. Philip and Bartholomew, neither one of them are disambiguated. Neither is Thomas, because they're so far down the list. Philip is 61, tied for 61. Bartholomew, tied for 50. And Thomas, less than 99. So he's somewhere in between 99, 98, I guess. And Matthew, who is number 9, so he's one of the top names. He's the tax collector. James, one of the top names. And Thaddeus. So James is number 12, is it? I'm sorry, I've got something on. He's number 11. And he's the son of Alphaeus, so he distinguishes him from James, the brother of John. Thaddeus, number 39, doesn't need one. Simon, number 1 again, he's Simon the Zealot. Judas is number 4, so it's Judas Iscariot who betrayed him. So you see how the common names, the first 10 names at least, or maybe 12, are disambiguated, but there's no reason to disambiguate because they're not ambiguous. There are not many Bartholomews. There's not many Thomases, even though he's called Didymus, or the twin. Philip, he's number 61. Well, Philip isn't a Jewish name. It's a Greek name, and actually named for Philip of Macedonia, king of Macedonia. They don't need to be disambiguated because there aren't many of them with that name. So you go back to the assertion now and look at this assertion that comes to us again saying that it contains oral traditions that evolved and grew for centuries. Now, how could these things grow for centuries if they are if they're so common or so clear across all four Gospels? And doesn't matter where you go and at what time, these Gospel accounts are all very distinct. Not distinct from each other, but they're distinct in the sense that they are accurate. So this assertion really doesn't tell us very much about these things. So when we look at this, we have to. Here's a quote from Peter Williams. He says, "Someone living outside the land would not likely give people the right names. However, the Gospels have four different authors, each one of whom has managed to present us with a credible array of Palestinian Jewish names. What is more, they have disambiguated the most common names for that land, even though in another land those names were not so common as to require disambiguation." So those are some of the things that are really important for us to understand. And what we have to really grasp is that there are early testimonies of the accounts in the Gospels from other writings. I wish I had the reference right here in front of me from Paul, when he and Barnabas are on Cyprus, and during their first sermon or first presentation of the gospel, Paul, who is somewhat recently converted, but had visited Jerusalem, he quotes the Gospels, quoting John the Baptist, saying that John the Baptist came, and when talking about Jesus, he said that something to the effect that of whose sandals I am unworthy to untie. And so you have this quote there. Well, where did Paul get that? Well, that mention in Acts, which happens some 30 years or 20 years after the resurrection, when Acts is written, Paul is quoting John the Baptist, who was alive somewhere in 30 AD, 31 AD, somewhere in that area, maybe 29, who is quoted as saying that he's unworthy to untie the thong of Jesus' sandals. So that was already a teaching when Paul visited Jerusalem, and got it. It was already common knowledge. This was part of the gospel presentation and was part of what we call oral history. Before it was written down, this was something that was still conveyed orally and by memory. And I believe it's Acts chapter 13 where Paul mentions this. And so you have these indications of credibility of the eyewitnesses, and I'm just touching on them, looking at this here, in 25 minutes, looking at some of these things that would respond to the assertions that the Gospels were copied so many times. It just doesn't hold water. And so we can easily embrace that the gospel writers are credible. Those who wrote the Gospels, their credibility is based on eyewitness accounts, whether they interviewed eyewitnesses, which Luke says he does in the beginning of his gospel, or we get the tradition from Papias, a first century disciple of John, who basically said that Mark was Peter's secretary, and he recorded everything that he remembered Peter taught or preached. And so we have that. So thanks for hanging in there. This is a little bit longer than I like it to be, but I think we cover enough information in this. And not quite 25 minutes. But if you can remember, please subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe. And we'll talk to you next time.